Welcome, everybody. This is Taylor Sharp, and this is the FileMaker Pro User Group March 1st, 2024 meeting. We're glad to have everybody here. I'm Taylor Sharp. Myself and Greg Price are the chapter co-coordinators, and we're glad to have you. We're here at the Harmonic Studios conference room here up in, is this Dallas or Addison?
Dallas.
Addison, up here north somewhere. So good to have everybody here virtually. I see we got a good crowd on the virtual list. So many of us, you'll see a whole group of us sitting up here in a panel, and we're here to talk and be led by Dennis Burnham to talk about the Engage conference, which is the annual FileMaker Developers Conference that was held this last month. And Dennis Burnham, Burnham Development is going to be our presenter. He's been a long-time member here, and he's attended most all the developer conferences I've ever been to, so he is quite the expert in developer conferences. So, Mr. Dennis Burnham, facilitate us.
Good morning to everybody. As Taylor said, I've been attending DevCon ever since the Miami event when FileMaker 12 was new, the new file format. And yesterday we agreed that it's okay for myself and anybody else to make any kind of critical comments about Engage and how you felt about it. We didn't really discuss the event venue in the past when we used to review what we all shared and learned from having attended DevCon. So it's a little bit different this time, and everybody felt that it was worthwhile to kind of review Engage itself in addition to whatever you folks on the panel want to share about what you learned in different sessions. I'll admit that I had some dissatisfaction with Engage. Somebody who worked in the travel business, I always considered to be what we called a self-liquidating event, which meant that whatever income Claris derived from what we paid to be there, or whatever other income they got from the event sponsors, the vendors, would pay for the whole thing. But it was very different this time being at the Apple campus because, as I understand it, Apple didn't charge Claris for the use of the space. And we all paid the same amount, basically, that we paid in the past, but we got one day less than we did in the beginning. And there were a number of other differences. For example, I can tell you that we used to get a lot of different items when we arrived there. And I can show you that I remember getting this little charger for my cell phone one year, and a ballpoint pen in the bag was a good one. And the shirt I'm wearing, I chose deliberately today so that it would remind you that once we got a decent piece of clothing. But this T-shirt feels to me like a pajama top, so I chose not to wear it today.
That's really comfortable.
So here's our agenda for today. First, we'll talk about the event logistics. And I'll make a few comments about that, and then I'll open it up for your comments. And at the end, we can talk about the curriculum itself, what went on in presentations and different sessions that you may have attended. Personally, I was not happy with the Apple campus. I made my hotel reservation earlier than they opened up hotels, and it ended up costing me $80 round trip each day on Uber to get to and from the campus. Personally, I prefer the summertime. I think we dodged a bullet this year in that there was no weather interference with air travel anywhere in the country during the week that we were there. Local transportation with the bus route I wasn't able to use. The hotel that I was at was not on the route. And we were some distance from the airport. It would have been nice to have a bus that took everybody to the airport on the final day. The food service was very different. And the Marriott Gaylords, we always had a delicious breakfast and lunch, more than we actually needed to be fed. But this time we got a box lunch, which I considered the equivalent of a high school field trip. Some of the rooms I found had furniture, desks, and I only found that out after I got home and I looked at some of the Soliant photographs that were online. Some of the rooms had good audio. Some of them, the microphone was either non-existent or it wasn't turned up enough. And it was hard for me to find my way around. The room names were not indicating what floor they were on, so I did a lot of elevator riding just to find my way around. The presenters and subject matter was a pretty good selection of things. And the most important thing I missed for navigating my way around was the absence of the app that we got in previous years. Taylor and I have talked about that and raised the question of why it wasn't something that was hosted, which would have made updates, happen on a live basis. And frankly, I never got to see the vendor exhibits because if I went to the one on the third floor, it wasn't the one I was looking for, which turned out to be on the second floor, and I would run out of time. So with that, let's hear what any of you want to talk about in the way you felt about the Apple campus.
Yeah, well, I'll go first. So my name's Steve Sikora. I'm one of the owners of Harmonic, and I had 7 people total at the event. So we certainly invested a decent amount in attending the event, and we were also one of the vendor sponsors. So we had some additional investment there as well. I would say a mixed bag. I would echo some of what you said, Dennis. The lack of an app was an oversight, and I think that and the transportation is an example of, as a whole, this felt very much like a prototype, a beta, 0.9 rev. I think they were kind of inventing some of this on the fly at the last minute. And I think the point I would make about the Apple campus is I think it could have been a lot better even using the same setup with a little bit more planning and communication to people about how the hotels were going to work, what the transportation was going to be, and with the ability to understand how it was going to be set up in that conference facility with the help of an app, et cetera, right? So I think knowing what to expect and communicating it more effectively from Claris to the attendees would be helpful. I hope they do a better job of it next year, because in my conversation with Brad, who's the CEO of Claris, they're going to do it again the same way, probably, almost certainly. And the answer, the reason, his reasoning why is very low risk of failure. He wasn't sure how many people were going to attend. He was actually blown away that as many people attended as did. But they were planning a conference for potentially as few as 300 attendees. They capped it at 650 because they hadn't planned to accommodate more than that, as I think was self-evident when we were there. But I think with some planning, hopefully they can address some of these things. So I know Dennis, you provided basically all the points of feedback that you gave. We've provided similar feedback. And so my hope is that Claris listened to that and improve some of those things. I think we could redeem some of the experience that we got in a conference hotel type facility without going that full level. And basically from what I heard, it sounds unlikely that Claris, at least for the next couple years, is going to make that level of a commitment again. I think they're trying to grow this and keep the cost low was one of the statements that I heard. And I would echo exactly what you said, Dennis, was how is the cost low? I'm not sure that the cost was low, but I would be all for a third day.
We paid out the same.
Yeah, I'd be all for a third day, maybe including some training. I think there are some things they could do to keep a cap on the cost and make it a better experience. That said, I want to counterbalance that by saying that having been there as a vendor and a sponsor, I had better exposure and more serendipitous interaction with people than I've ever had at any other event, both as an attendee interacting with vendors and as a vendor and sponsor, which we've been at several other events, right? So for my, I'll just put it out there, for my $10,000 I paid to be a vendor sponsor at this event, I feel like I got a lot more of my money's worth as far as brand recognition, as far as people walking past my booth and my space. And that was due to the layout. So I think it wasn't an all bad thing. I think that conference facility could be really good. There were moments that were really good. It certainly is a very nice building. I mean, it's an Apple campus building, right? So nothing but the finest, except sometimes the finest isn't working right because it's brand new and people don't know how to run the tech, right? So you kind of had a mix of all of that going on. So my hope is that this was a good beta run, and maybe in a year with some positive feedback and some planning, the good things are enhanced and some of the frustrations are diminished.
I'll add to that. I'm Heather McHugh. I'm expert at design documentation and low code, I think, at Harmonic. And
I think you're an expert.
no, I think those are the things I'm expert in. I've had the title for a while. I haven't settled on what it means. My title is expert, and I'm with Harmonic here in Dallas/Addison, or Dallas area. I spoke I gave 2 sessions. One I co-presented with John down there at the end, and that was our UX session, and I also gave a session on script triggers. Fortunately for me, both sessions were in the same room, so I only had to do the tech prep setup once, and I think that the tech was pretty good in there. Had a little trouble the second session with the connection. They had to reboot something, and it was a slight delay, but they had a room person. I don't remember what they called it, the room monitor.
Room host, yeah.
Yeah, the room host, right, who kind of took care of all your tech for you. That was nice. And as a speaker, I liked the setup. I liked the campus. Not that anyone ever updates their presentations right up to the last minute before they give it or anything, but the environment there was perfect because they not only had the rooms that the sessions were in, but there were lots of little collab rooms. There were lots of little rooms that had like one bench and a desk or 2, a table in the round. Every room had a monitor. Every room had a hookup. So you could share your screen and you didn't have to connect to anything. You just had to plug in and everything just worked. And I love that. So I was able to bring in my lunch, hunker down and finish some changes I want on my presentations, then give Jean a very detailed map, a pin of where I was, because as Steve said, the room names, or whoever said the room names, were not helpful. And they were like, skunk under the tree room or whatever.
They were all named like suburban subdivisions.
Right.
Which is nice, but I know this is, I don't know if Apple's thought of this before. I'm sure Samsung has. But if you number the rooms and put them in numerical order, and maybe like the first number of the room number indicates the floor, like, I don't know, maybe Apple could.
Might be helpful, but looking for where Waycliff Heights is, not helpful. What floor it is, I don't know. So I had to kind of give some cryptic instructions, or where Proof Geist is, head north, turn right, make a left, or right, anyway. But I was able to find nice rooms to do some one-on-one work with, and to follow up after sessions with attendees who had more questions. They urged us to not hang around in the room so that other people could come in, and that worked really nice. So for that reason, I liked the facility. I agree with you, Steve, about the traffic pattern, but I've also found that if I didn't have a reason to be on a particular floor, I didn't go there and I didn't know who was there.
Yeah.
So they need a little more of stuff happening where they kind of make you go to the different floors for different reasons or something in order to get you to move around more. But since I was giving presentations, I didn't get to attend a lot of sessions myself, again, because I am one who tweaks until the end. But I did enjoy what I intended. I did not enjoy the food. I have a very, very specific special diet, and they ask you about that in advance. And I gave them all the information. And there was at least one day at lunch, I was really glad that my husband had packed a lunch for me, because I couldn't find anything at all that I was actually able to eat from what they served other than the coffee. So that was a disappointment. I wish that there was more that there were more of the social events. They had one like the first night. That was really nice. But when you're in a hotel, you have more opportunity to follow up and to make plans to get together with someone. You can just say, we'll get together in the lobby later. I'll find you later. But when everyone is spread out to different Airbnbs and hotels in the area, it's much more difficult to do that. And I did follow up with some people after the event, and we had to, everybody had to decide on a restaurant, and it turned out to be a chain, and it's which one of the 20 of these restaurants are we going to, So that was not as convenient as we're used to. But the only other thing I would say is absolutely need a third day. There was not enough time, and not just because I was giving sessions, and so I spent a lot of time prepping and not attending sessions. But a third day, especially for the money, I think they could, not just could, but should include an extra day.
And it wasn't even so much the number of sessions. I mean, you could take the same number of sessions, not stack them as deeply,
Yes.
spread them across 3 days.
I did like that they put a 30-minute gap between every session. It created some odd session start times, right? That weren't like always on the hour. It was like on the hour, then the half hour, then the hour, then, but a bigger break for lunch, and so that was, it wasn't something I was used to. Also about the app, they didn't have an app like usual, but the Visionary Bar had one that was really good. And I used that. It's told you what floor things were on. It gave you everything that we're used to seeing on the app, except unless you volunteered to participate at the Visionary Bar, you probably didn't know about that app.
This is the first time hearing about it, so.
That was great.
Didn't know. Yeah. Well, I had heard people talking about it afterwards too, and I was like,
Yeah, I saw
It's so
somebody,
narrative.
I asked somebody where something was, and he says, "Don't you have the app?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Here, let me drop it to you." And apparently the thing they have actually has a, "Hey, share this with people, airdrop it to people," So that's how I got it, was from someone else. And I did volunteer at the Visionary Bar, so I don't know why I didn't know about it, but that's another topic.
Anybody else?
Yeah, this
Well,
is more,
I will comment on the T-shirt. I actually like the T-shirt. I think it's more comfortable than the last one I got, and I have been using it to lounge around the house. That's the only thing I've been using it for. So, to your point, Dennis, I mean, I'm using it for your stated function of that shirt. So,
In terms of cutback, speakers didn't get speaker shirts either.
Yeah.
Which they've always done in the past. So they asked us for our sizes, but then they didn't follow through.
Well, I made the comment that I did because the thing that I wouldn't do is wear that T-shirt in a professional setting if I was calling on a client. But having some pride in Claris and FileMaker, wouldn't hesitate to do it if it was a shirt with a collar.
right.
well, speaking of shirts and stuff, it would be nice if we had name tags that had the name on both sides so that when it
Yes.
flipped over, I was going,
Yes.
anyway, how hard is it to? And maybe one that had a little thing on it so you could slide it up so that it's not hanging down at someone's bottom of their stomach or something.
Right.
Yeah, I do think I would echo the what's been said about the meals that were provided. It felt a little bit like high school field trip, lunch kind of thing. But also the meal breaks were almost uncomfortably long. I think because they had to do essentially like in high school, 2 different lunch periods. Just so they said, okay, this choose which lunch period you want to go to, just so that way they could work
Well,
out
they weren't in the same
numbers.
room, and that was a big
Right, I mean,
difference.
right,
In DEF CON, we always had lunch together and all
Right.
with the vendors around us. And
Right, and this time it was there are lunches stacked up along the walls in like 6 different places, and just grab it and then find one of the rooms that everybody else is eating in. But even at that, like once you finish, you're like, okay, now I've got another hour and a half to do. I mean,
Well-
so I spent that time walking around. So unlike you, Heather, I visited all the floors multiple times because I would just walk upstairs and walk around the 4th floor and then go down to the 3rd floor and the 2nd floor. And then I go back up to the fourth floor and looking for something different. I don't know what it's doing, but it's just burning the time.
yeah.
So,
Well, for burning time, what they've done in the past that was kind of useful is they actually had tables with topics set up, or people from different geographic locations or whatever. So they have a different topic, per table, and that was a way of getting people together to socially
They
network.
didn't do a great job of directing people to those places, though.
Yeah, I accidentally wandered into one. I thought it was just a place to work. I'm like, are you here to talk about entertainment? I'm like, nope. And then it's kind of wilted.
Wait, or are you
I didn't
here for
even
the
know that.
yoga session?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there were 2 areas for lunch, and the one that I went to each time had a presentation on the screen at one end of the room. So I was careful not to sit close to that because any conversation would interrupt what other people were trying to listen to.
They did have, I didn't go to it, but they did have a game room set up.
Yeah.
Somewhere where they had
Yes.
different games you could go play and kill your time.
Bingo.
But it looked good. It looked like a good idea, but I didn't have the
But
opportunity to
in
visit.
true form to the rest of the stuff in that building, nothing was labeled. Like the restrooms weren't labeled. It was just, oh yeah, behind that white wall over there. Right. So like what if you knew where stuff was, it was fine. But and of course that's the whole uber minimalist aesthetic that Apple's going for,
So speaking of not labeling things, the one staircase that was labeled was the one that had no re-entry. So I only found out that there was another staircase like towards the end of the second day, and people had been like, I think there are like people who waited a long time on the elevators because they didn't know where to find the stairs.
Right.
So yeah, labeling works.
Extra
What about the different topics? Claris Studio, Connect, the AI discussion, any of those?
Just a second. This is Gerard Beutler with LinkNet. And one of the things that I kind of got disturbed about was finding out late in the plan that you were supposed to schedule which sessions you were going to.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you had these sessions and then some of them were closed. And I says, well, how are they going to control this? So when I got my badge and I saw no QR code, I knew that they weren't going to scan anybody coming in. So so what happened is you would get some of these rooms that they didn't have the controls on. So I did the illegal thing too and went to ones that I didn't have scheduled, and I sat on the floor. But that was a little bit confusing and a little bit disheartening, seeing that you went through all this action, and then when the plan was implemented, there was no plan. So that was kind of interesting. So that was that I didn't have too much friendship with.
I think it would have been, this is Greg Price. I think it would have been a much simpler if they had sort of allowed people to choose first and then make the determinations. They've kind of pre-selected the rooms based on what they assumed the response for each of those sessions was going to be. But I mean, we all know how we've gone to, at least those of us who have been to DevCons in the past, you go to a session that has a huge room and there's 25 people in it, right? And I think that to that end, if they were going to go ahead and have limitations on these, they should have kind of set out what those limitations could be, and then accommodate rooms after the fact, and then maybe allow people to sort of be assigned to those based on first come first served on when they originally registered for them. And then everybody else kind of gets, well, we can fit you into this one, so you have to pick something else. But I didn't really feel like they did a very good job with organizing that when they clearly could have, and they very much should have, considering the size of some of those rooms.
I was at a meeting and I heard about you need to schedule these sessions, and the thing was that they didn't make any note of that early on in the registration that, hey, you need to schedule these things. But the thing I thought was kind of funny is they didn't even have a process in place to barcode scan anybody when they came into the room. So right away I knew it wasn't going to be implemented. So
I learned about the pre-scheduling during one of the speaker prep meetings just a couple weeks before Engage, and they advised us to please be sure to schedule ourselves for our own sessions Well, that's how I learned about it.
Does Apple have an auditorium that fits more than 650 people at the campus?
Don't know.
Not that we saw.
Not that I'm aware.
The one that we had the
They do
keynote
that
in, maybe.
one. Yeah. Well, actually, they could do it there. I mean, there has to be a place where we can have everybody in a single location. I mean, that really was the problem with the keynote being maxed out. And if we want it, if it's this big this year, it'll be bigger next year, and that certainly will not work.
Steve, so you said you spent 10,000 to be a sponsor, and they were expecting 35 or 350 people.
Right.
So they're expecting you to pay $35 per person to have the potential to maybe talk to them.
Right.
That's a ridiculous number for impressions. I mean, they're very one-on-one, but was it? You said it was worth it. So that's. But every I didn't go. Every criticism here is they planned on 300 people going, and when it got to 650, they didn't care. They didn't change anything. They just said, "Yeah, we'll do fine with 300," because every problem they're having that I've heard is they didn't have enough resources in place to deal with it. And it wasn't the money. They had enough money to do it,
For sure.
except you charge more when you use less, expect fewer people to cover the same idea. So they had a surplus. Somebody had a great party after this on the campus. But so the question to you, I mean, does apart from speculation, you spoke to Brad, you said briefly, yeah, was that literally, oh, we think we'll have 350 and it turned out to be 650, which now seems to be the max of their biggest room? They just don't, it doesn't sound like they care about this anymore. Because I've been to a number of these historically, which were great, networking, educational, all that.
Brad's statement was, because I was expressing to him that I was missing some things that we've had historically at a hotel type conference facility, right? And his pushback was based on what he is wanting to accomplish, which is to get younger, newer, less well-heeled developers into this conference, right? So I think there's a disconnect between his vision for what he wants to accomplish and what we actually experienced, right? It wasn't inexpensive by these conference standards. It was on the more expensive end. And I think the crowd wasn't particularly a brand new younger crowd. It's people who came back for our own various reasons. But his goal is I want it to be as inexpensive as possible, and I want fresh young blood. And I don't know that, I think the quote, I'm going to paraphrase, but the quote was something along the lines of, I don't know that hanging around the lazy river with us old guys is what somebody is, what our target demographic is looking for. Okay. So, I think the challenge would be make it half as much money, add another day, advertise about it better ahead of time, and so forth. Now, I would say our choice to sponsor was less to do with an expectation of impressions, from a sales or marketing standpoint, and more to do with a community support and community goodwill kind of being there and being seen. We are the one kind of Texas-centric company, so I felt like we would also be conspicuous by not being there at the and I shouldn't say company, but the platinum partner of modest or greater size. And I'd probably make the same choice again, but we certainly didn't plan to go there to get a customer, right? And that's not why, right? It's maybe to hire somebody, right? Or something like that, right?
Well, then I'm moving on to you, Heather, because you go to Pause on Air.
Yes.
You go to this. You go to the Moose one too, don't you?
Yes.
value, rank those 1, 2, 3 for the past year. Which is the most valuable?
Gee, tough question.
And specifically, the cost benefit analysis as it relates to.
Honestly, cost benefit, I think Moose was the best investment. It was a short time frame, but it was packed with the right topics. It had the right audience. It had been marketed to the right people, I suppose. So I'm sorry that Moose isn't happening anymore. I went to 2 of them, or both of them, and I think that was real good value for the dollars. Moose was not particularly expensive. I don't remember the exact price. I'm just ballparking here, like, $600-700 to go. It was in Chicago, which is easy for most people to get to quickly and back. So I felt like I got a lot of value out of Moose. I got a different kind of value out of DevCon's Engage and Pause. Pause was a very different environment. It was a whole different vibe, right? And I won't say it was a vacation, because it wasn't, but the environment was so much less stressful. It was so...
It's kind of like going to camp.
Yeah, it's like going to camp. Yeah. And so I felt like I bonded more with other developers, which meant we could I felt more comfortable talking about more things with people that I might not have approached before. People come to me and ask questions thinking technically my title's expert, right? So people come to me, but there are a lot of people in the community that I look up to, and a lot of them that I have felt, I'm not typically a shy person, I don't hesitate to talk, right? But people that I wouldn't necessarily feel were approachable to me, like didn't feel like I was in their realm, but in that environment of Pause, it's like everybody's camping together. And I had that opportunity to have some great conversations and bond with people that I never would have at an Engage. So I think that the ability to discuss different things and to go off topic at Pause was great. The fact that it's so much less structured and that the sessions are really interactive, there's incredible value in that. As I said about this Engage, I did not get to attend many sessions myself. That was my own choice and issue, right? But what I did attend, I really enjoyed. And I thought that the offering of topics was pretty great, but limited by only 2 days. And the having to pre-schedule. I understand why they did the pre-scheduling. They explained that to the speakers. It was based on the room sizes, because the room sizes are smaller. They just were smaller. And so I think they were perhaps concerned about a lot of hallway traffic. People found that they couldn't fit into something. And then, you got backup and people roaming around. So they tried to deal with that. I think maybe it could have been done better. Certainly could have let everybody know ahead of time. Maybe had wait lists for things that you couldn't get into. As a speaker, it was really great to see that our UX session was sold out. Yeah, that was kind of cool. But from an attendee perspective, I think the scheduling didn't come across as was intended. They didn't make the point of why they were doing it the way they were doing it. And it turned out to be much more flexible in reality than what it was advertised as. It was kind of like, if you don't schedule for it, you can't go to it. But people were coming and going. The one problem, though, was because the way the rooms were all set up, they were rooms like our conference room here, which meant the doors to enter were not in the back. Right? So if you wanted to sneak into a session, you're coming in right up front next to the screen to walk in.
You couldn't hang out in the back and see if you liked the session and sneak out.
Sneak out, right? You couldn't do that. You had to make a very public departure if you were going to leave.
Now,
maybe that's why no one left.
One of the positive comments, though, that I'll make about the room size, because it was smaller, it was much less in a hotel ballroom, you get the vibe of there's the great prophet on high, on the stage, far away, bequeathing their infinite wisdom and knowledge upon us, just peons in the audience. And in this environment there was no stage. It was a front of the room.
Right.
And it was much more and not that it felt more like a conversational atmosphere. So rather than a TED Talk performance type thing, it was, hey, I'm going to just share some information. I'm not putting on this Broadway production of a presentation. So that kind of tighter, more intimate feeling was it was different, and it was nice from a speaker standpoint, because I also gave a session, and from an attendee standpoint. It made I think it brought the speaker and the attendees closer together, physically, literally, but also allowed for more, I think, fruitful back and forth. Because you weren't standing at a mic asking the person 60 feet away a question, right? You were 10 feet away raising your hand.
In the past,
right?
It was more like a large
in the
classroom.
past at DevCon, if the presentation was going to run an hour, there was usually time at the end, and a line would develop at the microphones for people who had questions. And sometimes that was the best part of the presentation, was the answers that came to that Q&A. So I would miss that this year. Also, I attended 2 sessions where one I actually walked out of because I could not understand or hear properly. And I spoke to Todd Geist about it afterward, because the person, I don't remember his name, but somebody who worked for Todd, he just needed coaching. Nobody told him to project his voice so that the people in the back of the room could hear. And he had one of those speaking faults where he kind of swallowed the end of his sentences, and then you didn't hear. And then he started his next sentence, and you had to kind of guess what the previous sentence was ending on. And one other comment I'll make is that I found accidentally that the 2 rooms on the ground floor with the leather upholstery were equipped with AC outlets at the base of each seat. And AC outlets were hard to find except in those rooms. And if you had a cell phone that needed recharging, it was a struggle to figure out where to go to plug it in.
All those little rooms that I mentioned earlier, they all had power. They all had outlets. So find yourself a little room next time. As some of you may have noticed, I don't have a problem with projecting my voice. So microphones have not really been an issue for me, but what did you think?
Yeah, I had to project.
You have to make more effort.
Which takes.
But I thought you did well, though.
Yeah, I figured with the size of the room, and they said that they had microphones at the top of the.
Yeah, they said that the microphones were like in the ceiling, but you couldn't see them.
And so I imagine they had to project, especially if the presentation is being recorded.
Yeah.
For people who are in the back to be able to hear.
I'm eager to see the recordings.
Okay, everybody, this is your stage manager stepping in. We were about halfway through with our discussion today. So there's been a lot of talk about the facility and our experience speaking and what's going on. What I'd like to now know about is a little bit about the content of what was actually talked, where Claris looks to go and what have you.
I attended an interesting session called FileMaker that had nothing to do with FileMaker at all. And it had to do with time management. And I thought that was fabulous. I'm not 100% sold on the technique yet, because like they gave you tiles to use that follow the technique, which I won't get into here because I'm not giving that session, but they didn't give you the round dial that went with it that he used. So that requires me to make my own, which I haven't gotten around to doing yet, but it's only been a month. At some point I will, and then I will try out their technique. But I thought it was great that they offered some sessions that weren't actually FileMaker, but that would be helpful to us as developers and managers.
So to that end, all the sessions were recorded, and I think we're a couple weeks away from they're going to release the recordings to anyone who attended and anyone who purchased. I believe they offered a $99 virtual, option. And then the plan, I'm sure, is to release them broadly, maybe as a whole or in groups to the public at large. That this statement, if you opted in for the $99 part, was for a limited time. You will have access to this, and other people won't. So hopefully nobody spent $99. I'm not sure that that's worth it. But my hope is that the recordings are good quality. I think they should be, because of the sessions that I attended, I want to go back and rewatch 80% of them. I thought the session content was very good. I thought it was well done. I thought the speakers were well chosen. And I am very much looking forward to attending several of the sessions that were booked up, because I didn't know to register ahead of time. And so they were ones that I would have registered for and were full, and I didn't cheat and jump in the back of the room instead on the floor. Though I absolutely was tempted in a couple of cases, and then I got into a conversation with somebody. So, that's so it goes. For me, one of the things that I went there wanting to understand and talk about, so I'll just talk about this for a second, was really the whole, where are we at with AI, and where is Claris at with AI? How are they thinking about it, and how are they integrating it? And I would say that myself and most of the people that I've talked to, I don't know that we came away with a crystal clear picture. I don't know that anybody presently has a crystal clear picture on the topic. It's such a large and varied topic. But I'll tell you that they kind of boiled down into two categories. One category was, how can you and should you be leveraging existing AI opportunities that are out there with the current platform, right? What are people doing, and how can you leverage that? A very fascinating one that I didn't see that I want to follow up on was was it by Ronnie?
Ronnie Rios.
Yeah, Ronnie Rios. Yeah. And he was talking about using just existing FileMaker and using AI to auto-generate charting, and had a pretty fascinating presentation about something that he's literally doing for people there inside of Claris. The other side of it was, where is Claris going with AI? And really the story is that the next version of FileMaker will have some very specific hooks that will let us leverage those large language models tied directly to our databases, and with the controls that you'd expect, right? I want you to be able to see this field and not that field. I want my queries to include the larger world of information out there, or be excluded to only my database, so that I can control, hallucinatory issues and so forth with my responses. So I learned actually that's an official term, hallucination, right? I thought it was just people talking conceptually, but it turns out it's an official thing.
San Francisco bros would make that an official term.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the session where this was kind of presented, that like the big reveal session, was given by one of Claris's engineers. I'm sure he's a very smart man. His name is Wade Ju, and he is incredibly impossible to understand. So it is worth watching, because, you can kind of, between what you think he's saying and what he's showing on screen and so forth, you get a lot of good information, and it really shows where Claris is going with the next version of FileMaker and how it's going to integrate. And I have a million ideas I want to leverage with it. Difficult to listen to, but very good information.
Steve, I'd like to make a comment about what you said about recordings, if I may. especially if you're going to have continuing discussions with Brad, like you mentioned before. You may remember that years ago, one of the things that we got after attending DevCon was a little package of maybe a dozen or 15 DVDs, or maybe they were CDs, but they were recordings. And Claris doesn't undergo that expense anymore. But the recordings are especially important, not only for the sessions that you couldn't attend, because physically you can't attend them all, but also to be able to go back to something and just listen to it a second time. And, you know, another thing, by the way, that they don't spend money on that we used to get in the past was an NFR copy of FileMaker was kind of like a gift to every attendee. So we don't deal with that expense anymore. And to the extent that it influences the price and the value that we all get from attending, you may be able to remind him about that.
Yeah, I was impressed by the presentation from Ronnie Rios. I think admittedly, he is probably dealing with simpler file schema, of which that is easier to work with.
Like our billing file?
Right. And he's shown it's conceptually possible, but in order to apply to a large data set is both a programming project and also it's learning as well.
But you mean it's conceptually possible to do the AI, or it's conceptually possible to have simple schema?
I can't speak on the latter. But yeah, at least it's conceptually possible to apply it to a enormous data set, but it's an incredible investment for any company wanting to actually get into that.
Yeah.
And for those of you who didn't attend, the little demo that he gave of this in the keynote as kind of like a teaser to come to his session was he in his FileMaker file, he typed in show me a pie chart of expenses over, whatever, some kind of data analysis, and poof, there the chart would just show up on the screen. And he had stuff tied in with a large language model that was interpreting his question or a request for a chart and mapping that to specific keywords in the database to do a SQL query to generate the data for this chart. So it was really cool. So he said, hey, I don't have to create charts for my users. They can just type in what they want, and there it is. So of course, then I immediately began shooting holes in it. In my head, I was like, well, what about this? And but I didn't go to a session, so maybe he addressed some of those. But very, very interesting topic and direction.
Speaking to the AI stuff, I actually attended Ronnie's and I attended the other session specifically because I was very interested in how this was going to be applied. And if any of you have played with any of the language model tools that are out there, you understand that you're asking a question of the system, and when you don't frame the question, it's going to rely on its learning to answer the question. What Ronnie was demonstrating is that and this was the light bulb moment for me on the first day. And you can ask my roommate, I didn't sleep for 2 days after that because it hit me right. I couldn't understand exactly how the AI would understand my solution that we're working with. And his explanation of it was completely logical to me. So what, in a nutshell, is in the language models, whenever you play with them, you can ask it to mimic certain behaviors. Like you can tell it to play a role, such as a storyteller. You're going to be a storyteller and you're going to tell me stories of a fantasy adventure, or you're going to tell me stories about a little dog and his adventures in the world, or whatever it is. In his case, he's telling it to be an AI assistant that is going to answer questions from a FileMaker database. And then you start to divot the structure. You tell it like which fields are on a layout. So for instance, in the example he gave where you were doing a find to show me all the contacts made in the month of June, it's getting a list in this teaching prompt of all the fields that are on that layout. In addition to that, you're inserting into that initial load a conversation that you had with the AI. Now, the AI doesn't know that you had a conversation with it, and frankly, you're not actually having this conversation. You're telling it, hey, we last spoke, I asked this, you returned this. I asked this, and you returned this. And you do this with like 5 or 6 different examples on the initial prompt. And at the very bottom of that initial prompt, you ask the user's question. And so you're, in the beginning, defining what role it's going to play. You're going to tell it how to communicate. And he had a really nice way of formatting the response that it expected back in a JSON query with fields and values and such. And then you tell it which fields are available on this layout. So it doesn't have to know the entire system. It just has, in this particular example, it was in the scope of just the single layout. And then you say, we had this conversation, and you detail out the conversations. And then it will return in that example the JSON return that you expect, that you've defined at the beginning. That is then parsed into a find script, that FileMaker that you've programmed to say, take these elements from the JSON and perform this find on this layout. And then whatever rules you have to how you handle null void or null results and all that are up to you. But the part that was a light bulb for me was just the teaching part, because I understood how to communicate with it before, but I couldn't understand how FileMaker was going to understand my solution. And that was the light bulb moment. As to the graphing side of things, and the example of that was the dashboard, the dynamic dashboard. You have to provide it just a little bit more information that's outside of the scope of the layout you're on. Like, so you then tell it more about the structure of the tables you have underneath. And then that particular query will return a SQL statement that performs the find to return the data. And that SQL statement is coming from the AI. So you just said, here's what the person wants to use or find. Here's the structure of the data. And it actually does not include any teaching. So you're not teaching it how to respond. You're just asking it for a SQL request. It turns back a SQL request and then performs that SQL request at the end of the process. And so it's storing the SQL for later. And then if you want to refresh your dashboard, it doesn't make a new call to the AI. It only created the query from the AI, and then you have to refresh the window to see that query refreshed so that the data can change. If I were to speak on how this is going to impact my business, I was super excited about it. 'Cause one of the giant things that I have to deal with is supporting customers dealing with our software that is rather complicated. And I have over 300 sites where this stuff is sitting, and the users are typically not very computer savvy. So if I can give them the tool set where they can ask the system, how do I find this number of children with this grant, then that's one less phone call that I have. And the other nice thing about it is we can save all the queries. So we can have any query that may have come back with an empty answer, or it didn't know the answer, have that query sent to the developer, and we can better train the model to be able to find that answer for them. And then it can even go further than that. Like, that's an example of using it for navigation. You can add for the find request was already in that system. The dynamic dashboard was in there. I mean, there's tons of stuff to do, but don't overthink it for a moment. Don't think about you have to load up the entire system for it to have this magical library of your application. Rather, start smaller and then extend it as you need to. And I think you'll find that this is going to be one of the most amazing things we add to our solutions.
I wondered what's going to happen in FileMaker is training it. Part of its new job will be to prompt the LLM. And a lot of this seems to me could be built into FileMaker, so the role playing and things like that that you need, FileMaker can provide.
that's certainly an evolution I think that might be worth looking into. They did talk about being able to roll out your own LLM to provide, this back-end service for you. Because if you think about it, it still doesn't know anything about a FileMaker database, and it still doesn't know it. It does understand how to formulate a SQL query, but it knows nothing of our solution that we don't tell it.
I'm just excited about the part where you said that in the learning, you can define the format of the response to come back as JSON in the format that you're expecting. And I see that as incredibly powerful. Because we can do anything with that.
If you haven't downloaded his sample file, there was a considerable amount of thought that he put into the response, which was very handy, I thought, because it described everything about here's my solution, and if I was on this particular layout, it would know these are the fields available. So it formulated the find to say perform a find using this field, and then you can also omit other elements, like his example was find all the contacts made in June with the letter C in the name of the company, but no one in the state of Texas. And so when you see the result come back, it is performing a find where it puts the letter C in the company name, the date, last contact is June, and then it creates a new request for an omit where it omits state equal TX. And then we all know how to do that, right? We all know how to take that instruction and build out a process from, in a script. And he's already given it to us. And so if you want to compare that to the ETS model that they announced that came out, the real difference between the two is the one that he gave us has maybe 10 or 12 script steps to perform this process to get the result. In an ETS model, there's 2, right? There's the authentication and then the query, and that's it. But the structure of everything else is exactly the same. And so when you want to start playing with this, you can download the file. If you'd like, I can even pull it up here and show you a couple of things. But the key point you're going to need to know is that you do have to have an AI key to work with it. His model is set up to work with GPT, so it's going to work with OpenAI. And so you can buy, $10 worth of tokens to assign to your AI token. And I think I ran it probably a whole day and I used a penny. So it's not, I don't know yet how deep that'll be, but it's definitely being able to reduce the number of support calls that my customers have will greatly pay for itself.
So let's pivot the conversation a little bit here to platform. Claris, if any of you have been along for the ride from FileMaker to Claris and Claris to the new Claris platform that wasn't FileMaker, but now it's all one thing, and it's been a fuzzy few years with those of us with some history trying to figure out who's on first and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think what we saw in the keynote is what they've settled on. I guess that's the message that I would state, and it is kind of a T graphic where you've got on the one side, for hundreds of users with more complicated modalities, you've got FileMaker, and that is going to remain the solution. That will remain their flagship product. They stated quite clearly that we're investing all of our AI money in FileMaker first. Why? Because it's the thing with the biggest traction. It's the thing that's the most flexible. It's the thing where people are going to want to use it first, right? So they're continuing to invest in FileMaker as the hundreds of users, complicated solution delivery modality tool in their tool set. Claris Studio, on the other hand, is their solution to thousands of users. It's the I don't want to have to pay a license. I want to be an anonymous user solution. It's the way to leverage modern technologies and microservices and things like that, interact with our data, and to interact with that same data set and FileMaker from the internet, right? Which a lot of us historically have used custom web technologies to do that. And I think we will continue to do that, but I've got to say my interest is very much more picked with some of what they are doing with Claris Studio. I think they're getting close to the point where I'm actually going to really try to use it with customers for real, right? And the big delivery there. They've had several of us, a pretty closely held group of us, in an ETS cycle where they've been trying to deliver a project management solution. And if you watch the main Claris Studio presentation by Claris himself, it's about that. And the big thing is they have a new view, which is all the views, right? So if you think of FileMaker, I can have portals, and I can have fields, and I can put calendar objects, and I make it look like whatever I want. Well, when Studio first rolled out, it wasn't that, right? It was one view was a list view, and one view was a Kanban, and one view was this other thing and this other thing, right? So they built these separate components. Well, they finally delivered you can have a view that's any of the components assembled however you want, and it'll do the right responsive things, and they'll work together and be interactive, right? So they're finally about ready to roll that out. That, to me, that's a game changer. The big thing I'm waiting for is, let me authenticate it against something that's not a Claris ID.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're not there yet, but they promise they're working on it. So I'm glad to hear that. And then the third leg of the stool, if you will, is Connect, which those of us who've been along for the ride with Connect were once again reminded, oh yeah, that thing, we tried it once. Here's the big story with Connect. Claris has been working on this thing with Apple. Apple has a deal that they roll out called Apple School Manager, and Claris has been working on this thing with Apple, trying to get some traction where they can leverage Apple's sales staff to get Claris places where to get Claris technologies places where Claris on their own can't get. And they finally started to get some real significant traction. The story behind the scenes on that, because we played with that whole concept with them a couple of years ago. We built an app for them, and our part was ready way before their part was. Behind the scenes, what they've done is they've invested a ton into Claris Connect to run that, to sit between the school information system and the Claris backend data structures, right? And it uses Claris Connect to do that. So Claris Connect, I think the story that Claris would want you to hear, and the story that I'm sure some of us start to try to figure out, is they feel like it's ready for prime time. They feel like it is the way they want you to be moving data back and forth. There's a new connector between Studio and Claris Connect, and that could be back to FileMaker on-prem and do some things that you can't do other ways, and so forth. So that's their vision. That's their platform vision, right? My thousands of users, my hundreds of users, and my interaction data move integration widget tool set, which is Connect. And they presented that. They told us they've got lots of new users with that Apple School Manager thing. And they really would like for all of us to start using Studio and Connect, because they basically said without saying, nobody's using these things and we really want you guys to.
I thought they said that explicitly in the keynote. You guys aren't using this. You're missing out.
So they ask you, why are we not using
I think they know that.
But one of the things that they did explicitly call out in the keynote, which I was glad to hear and a little surprised to hear, was they made the unequivocal statement. They, talking about Studio and Connect as products. They said there is no business problem or whatever that you can solve solely with Studio or solely with Connect. They said they're always meant to augment something that you're already doing in FileMaker. So something that that you're currently doing in FileMaker, but making it easy to do that, like API integrations, for instance. Right? There's and because when they first launched Studio and when they first launched Connect, I don't know that they made that point clear that these are not standalone solutions. They will never be. They're not intended to be. They're not designed to be. They're meant to be used in addition to your core FileMaker thing. Because when they first launched them, it kind of felt like they're saying, hey, we're not saying we're getting rid of FileMaker, but we're kind of getting rid of FileMaker, and these are the new things.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah,
Certainly what it
but
felt like.
they maybe it was Brad in the keynote who said, like, we are not doing that. You cannot solve a problem with these two things. They're augmentations, not on their own. So in that keynote, they recognized, and they said that they recognized that they hadn't done a good job of communicating what these different products were for and how they were different and when and why you should use one. And so they went into that in the keynote. And for the first time, I was like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do with Studio. That's helpful. I was never clear what I was supposed to be using Studio for until they actually articulated, here is how you should use it and why it makes sense to use it in that case.
Okay, so on that point, I've been using FileMaker since version 3 for in-house development of whatever I needed to do.
Right.
And where I am now, I use FileMaker to augment our suck-ass accounting system. Because Microsoft is very clear, and I say this because I work for a company that said we needed to go to something new, and they said, well, we can play with this and build you something, but we don't have it natively. All right, so there's a lot of stuff in our system we don't have that, or the way they have it is limited. So I developed it into FileMaker. And like you could scan an invoice one page, and you had to have a scanner on your desk for everybody to have one at their desk. So I just said, okay, here's my app, here's what it does. And it to validate the data, it looks at the PDF and the person says, that's this voucher number. Key that in. Poof, there's all your data. It's reading from FileMaker. Then on AR, it says, it says invoice there. It's looking to the accounting system because Microsoft handles AR and AP totally different. So, but I built integration to balance it. I can feed data up to it. I can pull data down. It's working great. I have yet to see anything, and I'm a server subscriber from 17 to now, and I have yet to see one word come to me that says, here's what Studio can do for you. Here's what Connect can do for you. And so when I saw there was a Connect board, I went and said, okay, tell me what you do. I don't know what it does. Can it do something for me? And they said, well, what do you do? And I gave the basics. No, can't do that. Connect can do it, but it'll cost you more money. So now I'm hearing Studio. I don't know. Will Studio integrate to do what I do? The biggest issue I have right now is Microsoft is changing how Outlook works, and we email out. We're fine with text emails, so I don't have to do anything special. But that's going to change in the next year or two. Mm-hmm. Outlook's going to force it to happen. And I couldn't migrate to 20 on FileMaker because it doesn't talk to this level of ODBC, which is what my accounting uses. And I don't think it'll do it when we upgrade. Our Great Plains administrator says, yes, we're going to upgrade, but I don't think it's still high enough because they've said, here's where you can go. We're down here and we can move here, but this is where we're on. So, and then of course, I have developers who say, oh, ODBC is not really what you want to do. And I go, you don't know what I want to do. Leave me alone. You know? So what you're saying about communicating this, they're not.
Yeah, I think they're just starting to figure out themselves how to articulate it externally, right? Just to be realistic, I don't think it was clear 2-3 years ago because they weren't clear about what it was. The licensing now will include basic licensing so every FileMaker license is going to include, going forward, basic licensing for Studio and basic licensing for Connect. That's problem number one, because if we can't play with it, nobody's ever going to figure out how to leverage it. Studio, I think, for a very long time, Studio is effectively going to be a replacement for custom web code. But you would either build custom web code or you will use Studio to do a thing. And the reason why you might want to use Studio to do a thing instead of building your own custom web code, or frankly, instead of using WebDirect, is because it is an absolutely modern microservices-based multi-tier platform.
Sorry about that. It's one of those technical things. Can you all hear now?
So have you tried the Great Plains API?
No.
See if there might be, maybe one with Connect, have a connector to.
Remember when you showed, I don't actually get to come because my boss is going to be kicking my tush when I get back because it's end of month and I'm supposed to be doing things. But you the last time I was here, you gave an example of making invoices available externally to a customer. Now we have we send invoices out by email using FileMaker because Great Plains sucks at that extra. But we have so right now I have a table that has every invoice there. So Studio might be a way to make that available for the customer to get their own invoices more easily than this neophyte trying to figure out how to do it.
Yep.
And so I was excited when I saw your presentation on that, and then hearing this about Studio helping to augment FileMaker for certain things. That's a good thing for me.
The other thing, just speaking, and by the way, this Dynamics GP, so historically Great Plains, now Dynamics GP,
Yes.
is that what you're using?
I think it's kind of call it Microsoft Dynamics as opposed to Great Plains.
Yeah, but it's
the
Great Plains lineage. Yeah, so we have a couple customers on that as well. One of the other things that's out there, and we have not done it yet, but frankly, Great Plains might be a good area for us to explore, and I'd be happy to talk to you about this offline as well. There are custom connectors now. So with Claris Connect, one of the big frustrations originally was they said, well, here's this thing, here's the cool stuff it does, and we support these 17 services, all of which seem to be Slack.
My ass is what it usually is.
Right. So now that we can build a custom connector and we can make it talk to whatever we want and do whatever we want, that might be a way also to interact instead of, for instance, ODBC, right? That might be a path as well. And something, frankly, as an organization, we might be interested in pursuing and setting up.
It's been a challenge. Primarily what FileMaker does for us is just consolidate data that Great Plains is bad at doing, because we actually have Great Plains broken down into 3 business entities. So there's 3 sets of files. And the Great Plains administrator looked at me one day and he said, how are you validating your data if the invoices could be in any of the 3 companies? And I said, learn FileMaker and you can go look behind the scenes. It does lookups, and I fake it out, and nobody knows it's looking at 3 different databases that are shadow tables.
Yeah. Good for sure.
Yeah. So
I think we're running out of time. We're past our 12:30, aren't we?
We are. There's a great wonderment where our food is.
Dennis, maybe you want to give us some concluding words or something?
The only concluding words I could give you are the end.
The problem is we have so much more to say.
No, I'm glad to see that. And my thanks go to Fred and you for putting this together.
Well, certainly fun. Anyway, okay, everybody, take care and see you next month.